al-Assad? Should he stay or should he go?
I think the status and the longer term status of President Assad will be decided by the Syrian people.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to AM Joy. That was U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson last Thursday saying it was up to the Syrian people to decide what to do about their dictator, Bashar al-Assad. Exactly 1 week later, on Thursday, April 6th, the Trump administration executed as sharp a U-turn in foreign policy as we have seen in modern history, and in particular when it comes to the U.S. posture toward Syria and its now 6-year-long civil war, which by some estimates has killed 500,000 people. 1 week after Rex Tillerson said essentially it's not our problem, Trump ordered a missile strike on an air base inside Syria. It was a response to the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime against its own citizens who are rebelling against his rule, and to the horrific images of the victims splashed across American media. So, how much of this U-turn was a change of heart by Donald Trump, or how much of a U-turn was this change of heart by Donald Trump? Well, Trump's been clear about opposing any U.S. intervention in Syria since at least 2013, when he posted tweets like these directed at then-President Barack Obama. What I'm saying is, stay out of Syria. And in all caps, again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen. And from that fight, the U.S. gets nothing, exclamation point. Once in the White House, Trump's opposition to U.S. involvement went well beyond what could generously be called benign neglect, when he tried to pass not one, but 2 legally contested travel bans against all Syrian refugees and travelers from 5 other Muslim-majority countries. So what happened between Trump believing that attacking Syria was foolish and his decision to launch 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at a Syrian military airfield over dinner with the Chinese delegation at Mar-a-Lago? Well, for one thing, less than 24 hours before that airstrike, Donald Trump made a major change to his national security inner circle. On Wednesday, Trump signed an order ousting his chief strategist, Steve Bannon, from the National Security Council's Principals Committee, an unprecedented position that Bannon held because of an executive order he put in front of Trump to sign back in January. The new order also restored the roles of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the director of national intelligence to their seats on the Principals Committee. And it added the Energy Secretary, the CIA director, and the UN ambassador to the group. And that's important for 2 reasons, one having to do with policy and the other having to do with who reportedly pushed Bannon out. According to several reports, Bannon's ouster was orchestrated by the man who replaced General Michael Flynn as the National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster, and by Trump's son-in-law and extra special advisor, 36-year-old Jared Kushner, who just this week visited Iraq with the Joint Chiefs Chairman. We'll talk more about Kushner's roles in the White House later. But that's not all. On Thursday morning, the same day of the Syria strikes, in response to numerous accusations of ethics violations for his handling of classified information, including possibly coordinating with the White House through a top NSC staffer in the dead of night, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes stepped down from his role in the investigation of Russia's alleged attempt to help elect Trump. Speaking of Russia, the nation backing Assad's rule in Syria is Russia, and who the Trump administration apparently gave a heads up before the administration's airstrikes. This week, the New York Times found that the CIA was briefing members of Congress last August about Russia possibly coordinating with Trump advisors to get Trump into the White House. After all of these national security shakeups and new information about Russia, the key question is this: what changed Trump's mind on the Russian-backed Assad regime? And what was the point of these airstrikes? And joining me now is Representative Barbara Lee from California. And Congresswoman Lee, you were just the person we wanted to talk to on this because you have long opposed what you have seen as U.S. interference in the Middle East and starting wars in the Middle East that you didn't see as justified. Can you tell us, in your view, at least from Capitol Hill, what you understand the purpose of these airstrikes to have been?
Well, Joy, first of all, there's total chaos in the White House and total confusion, so it's hard to really understand what the purpose of the strike was. We have to really recognize that, first of all, Assad has committed heinous crimes and killed so many people, and the use of chemical weapons is unacceptable. But also, we have to really recognize that one surgical strike is not going to change that. Actually, it could embroil us more in a civil war in Syria. And so it's hard to kind of figure out why the president would do this. Minimally, he should have come to Congress to seek authorization and a vote, because this is an act of war and it's illegal. And so for the life of me, you know, people need to really ask the White House what in the world is going on, because we do not need to get embroiled in a civil war, but we have to come together and help figure out a political settlement to this carnage that's taking place in Syria.
And you talked about coming to Congress. There were a number of very interesting bedfellows that were made by this strike. Among those who supported what Donald Trump did in Congress, of course, John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Marco Rubio, longtime hawks on this issue, the House Speaker Paul Ryan, and several other members of Congress, including a couple of Democrats, Eliot Engel of New York, and of course Senator Bill Nelson from Florida. So you've seen some sort of change of heart among a lot of really formerly, if you want to call them never Trump or anti-Trump or very Trump-critical politicians. What do you make of the Capitol Hill support, particularly from the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party, for these strikes?
Well, I think, you know, people really are shocked and angry about what is taking place with Assad. But speaking for myself, and I think most members are saying now that they think that the president should have come to Congress for a vote and an authorization. We're in recess. The speaker should call us back right away to begin to debate this, because when you listen to the Trump administration, they're talking about more to come. What is this? I say, based on our moral commitment and our humanitarian values, we need to call for a ceasefire right away, and that's why we need to come back to Congress so we can debate and come forth with a comprehensive strategy to begin to stop this carnage and this war that's taking place in Syria.
And we have to, of course, talk about the Russian piece of this, because we know that the Assad regime is backed by Russia, by Vladimir Putin's Russia. The reaction from Russia so far to the strike, the New York Times reporting that Russia, in addition to suspending a pact that coordinates air operations over Syria, an accord that was meant to prevent accidental encounters between the two militaries, Russia said that it would bolster Syria's air defense systems and was reported to be planning to send a frigate into the Mediterranean Sea to visit the logistics base in the Syrian port of Tartus. In addition to that, we also have reporting that the air base that was hit may not have been damaged all that much, because Syrian jets are still taking off from there. They're back to taking off from there, according to Syrian observers. Are you concerned about an escalation with Russia as a result of what you just described as potentially more to come from the administration?
I'm very concerned, because this whole issue with Russia is very troubling and is very dangerous. And I hope this doesn't sidetrack the public from really recognizing we have to have a bipartisan commission to look at all of the activities that Russia has been engaged in terms of undermining our democracy. Yes, you know, Assad and Putin's Russia and Putin, they're very close. And in fact, we need to know, and the public needs to know, the costs and consequences of what is taking place. And we have to immediately, though, Joy, when you look at what's taking place with the children and men and women in Syria, we have to insist that at least we have a ceasefire and a safe corridor so that humanitarian assistance and so that medicines and food can get in there. And we have to just stop and put a halt to this warmongering and this march to war, because it is, in fact, very dangerous. And it is, in fact, not going to keep our troops and our country any safer. This was an act of war, and it was illegal what the president did.
Congresswoman Barbara Lee, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And joining me now, Malcolm Nance, terrorism expert and author of The Plot to Hack America, Naveed Jamali, former FBI double agent and author of How to Catch a Russian Spy, and former State Department spokesperson Nayyera Haque. Thank you all for being here. Nayyera, I'm actually going to come to you first on the last point that was made a couple of times by Congresswoman Lee. She said that what we did, this strike, was an act of war, and she said it was illegal. From having worked in the State Department, what is your assessment of that?
Well, that's the argument about 2013. President Obama had essentially the same plan ready, and several plans ready from the military, because that's what the military does. It has options available for a commander-in-chief to use. And the decision was made to consult with Congress. And Congress at the time was not interested in getting the United States, or neither was the public interested in getting the United States embroiled in yet another war in the Middle East. We don't have a good history there right now, particularly with what happened after the military intervention in Iraq. So that's that's the argument, that consult with Congress, make a case to the American people before a commander-in-chief should go to make a military strike or go to war. Now, on the other side, you have the argument of looking decisive, and that's certainly what people say President Trump has done. He has looked decisive. He has looked different from Obama, but there is a lot of room between decision and dithering, and that's the room we're trying to fill right now and understand what is actually the goal here. Yes, he looks different than Obama. Nobody would ever confuse President Trump for President Obama. Yes, he knocked off several things from the headlines of the front pages that otherwise would have been news stories on their own. But the question is this about removing Assad? Is this about helping the Syrian people? That being the case, there should be more military intervention followed by plans, diplomacy, and the pressure that military can bring to bear to make Assad and other people pay attention.
And so, Malcolm, I think that is the main point. Is what was the point, right? They hit an air base that is now being used again almost immediately thereafter. There's no evidence that they destroyed any aircraft, or that they did anything of that nature, or that they destroyed the chemical weapons capability. From your point of view, strategically, did this have any point?
Well, it had a point for Donald Trump. And right off the bat, the Defense Department responded to his request. The question is, what precipitated his feeling that the United States had to act, in his view, decisively? Because it was a decisive decision, right off the bat. The question is, was it a shoot from the hip type of decisive action that he wanted to project? We projected a demonstration of American firepower. That's what we projected. We put out 59 cruise missiles, and we showed to everyone in the region that we could once again launch cruise missiles. Militarily, we struck the targets we aimed at. However, we put in several factors which didn't allow at all for any real, on-the-ground, tangible change to the situation. We literally warned the Russians that we were going to strike the base. The Russians warned the Syrians. They left the base. We only struck, as I understand, maybe 6 to 20 aircraft. Those ancient aircraft, when I was a young baby spy, those aircraft were old. They will now be replaced with new state-of-the-art Russian fighter aircraft with a much bigger capacity. And the last thing that's worse, that I think makes this mission failure, we did not strike the chemical weapons. We didn't destroy them. We left them intact, and this was supposed to allow, I guess, Russia to influence the Syrians, to set them aside or put them aside. I don't know. All I know is that the Syrians can now hide those chemical weapons and prepare for their use in advance. So right there, strategic, like I said, you have a visual effect, a giant fireworks display of very precise weapon systems, but total mission failure because Assad now can still use those exact same chemical weapons.
And Naveed, hanging over all of this is, of course, there's new information. The New York Times came out that way back in August, the CIA had information about potential coordination between the Trump campaign and the Russians. The Russians, as Malcolm just said, got a heads up. The State Department, by the way, did not. The Russians are still operating and still supporting Assad. What do you think that this says about the Trump-Russia connection and the Trump-Russia relationship?
Well, I'm not sure it says much about, the larger issue of the investigation. What I am concerned about is that, as we've seen with Russia, they're experts at manipulating information and propaganda, and there is something to that in regards to Syria. We look back at '95 and Bosnia. We have to be very careful that we have the international authority to act. There's this concept that was the preamble of the United Nations Charter that came as a result of the Second World War, this concept of crimes against humanity. I don't think anyone would argue that our moral compass is pointing the right way when we strike Assad after these horrendous attacks. That being said, there needs to be some international authority that gives the United States the right to actually strike. This is a sovereign state. It wasn't directly impacting our national security. Russia will take that and will use it in the international court. So it's very important that we do that. And also, to Malcolm's point, the idea that we started to maybe do a slight dent in Assad's capabilities. There's no doubt that the Syrians will now turn to the Russians. The Russians have said they're going to strengthen the air defense systems. That international, consortium, that international, something potentially at the UN would also block Syria from, building up its arms again. And that is a huge part. So Trump's strategy must include some part of actually using the international system to go after Assad. And to not do so would actually leave the Russians a huge opportunity here to use use this in a propaganda fashion against us.
And here's the random part. Considering that I'm coming from the diplomatic space, the challenge that we have with the international order right now is that it hasn't worked to prevent atrocities. Kosovo, Bosnia, Rwanda, and now we're looking at Syria. The United Nations is not the forum for strong moral leadership.
Yeah, and the State Department's budget is being cut and undermined by this administration. Very interesting. I guess we'll all be back. And for more on this story, do check out my latest column in the Daily Beast. The kids take over and turn Trump into W, talking about the shakeup that's put the kids in charge.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.